Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Material Matters, hosted by Grant Gibson. That's me. In each podcast, we'll be meeting a maker, designer, artist or architect who is intrinsically linked to a particular material or technique, discovering how their craft shape their lives and careers. Today I find myself in the Deptford-based studio of the extraordinary woodturner, artist, vessel maker Eleanor Lakelin. Amongst other things, Eleanor won a Wood Award in 2017 and was nominated for the prestigious Perrier-Jouet Art Salon Prize in 2014. She's represented by galleries such as Sarah Myerscough and Flow, and her work has been exhibited around the globe. Eleanor, lovely to see you. Thanks very much for doing this.
It's a pleasure. Possibly.
Well, we'll see. I mean, we're in this extraordinary space in Deptford where you make your work, surrounded by kind of half-finished pots and machinery. Ken, for the listeners, can you kind of paint a picture of the working environment that you inhabit?
OK, well, it's a studio on the Creekside in Deptford, as you say, in Cockpit Arts. I have in this studio, it's not very big, I have a couple of small spaces. This one has got my lathe in it, which is obviously the machine I do most work on, or where all work sort of starts off at least. There's a big bandsaw, and then there's a mixture of hand tools and power tools. So it ranges from angle grinders and hand chisels and gouges to dental tools and odd silversmithing tools that I use for various operations in wood, really. I'm not particular, I suppose, about the tools.
Well, I was going to say, how do you find, if you're using a dental tool, how did you stumble across that? Was that very bad root canal surgery you had or something? How does that work?
No, it just works because it works. I mean, that's the thing. I'm not so concerned about the process in the sense that I have to stick to some technical manual of how to turn or carve wood. I'm just more interested in how I get there. So if a dental tool works better, then I'm going to use a dental tool. And the reason I discovered it was simply because I was trying to excavate a tiny bit of bark from inside a burr because of one of the processes I use. And I just thought, it is a bit like excavating material from teeth. So, so I have some second-hand dental tools. Very handy they are too.
Can we get into your background? Because we're here in this very kind of urban setting of Deptford, but you grew up in a very different environment. Yes, totally.
I grew up in a very rural part of Mid Wales, a small village. I grew up on a farm. It was, I think there's probably about 10 houses in the village, 2 chapels and a pub. It was 17 miles to school. It was very rural. And so I spent a lot of my childhood trying to avoid working on the farm. So
your parents were farmers?
Yeah, when I was very young, they were. Then my father started running the school buses up and down the valley, and my grandfather took over the farm. So for my early life, I lived on a farm, yeah.
And was making intrinsic to those early years?
Well, fixing. If you live in any kind of rural community, or certainly on a farm, fixing things is part of what you do, especially if you live so far from anywhere else. But so I grew up sort of with my father he was very practical. In fact, both my parents were very practical, and we had a big workshop. The first thing I ever remember making or creating or fixing was my dad saying that there's a broken oak table in the dairy that the milk is being strained on, and it's got woodworm on the corners. Can you saw the corners off and kind of sand it and make it, And
how old were you when he was asking you to do this?
I don't know. I wasn't very old. I don't know. I was 10 or something. I don't know. It was a normal part, I suppose, of life. Building things to make them work, or creating things that would work for repurposing things maybe. But obviously, I spent a lot of my time trying to not be there, not to be sawing up tables, and to be wandering around the woods or down at the river or something. So that's but that is how I spent my childhood, is collecting things, really.
And then I'm interested. You're in almost like the opposite environment that you live in nowadays. I mean, this is as urban as you get. Was that a conscious decision to live somewhere completely different from where you grew up?
No, it was a conscious decision to do that when I was 18, certainly. It was a conscious decision to leave and to travel and to explore life outside of Mid Wales. But no, I mean, I find myself here just because of circumstance, I suppose, like everybody else, and a combination of, family considerations and, and in fact, when I came here, I wasn't making work in wood. Obviously, it's quite ironic that now I dream of a space and dream of, all the buildings that I grew up in that I used to, want to get away from. And now it would be fabulous if I had those buildings. But it's what it is. It's, you just end up wherever.
Because the interesting thing about you is kind of making these extraordinary vessels that you do now. This is almost like your third career, right? Because you started off as a teacher, I believe.
Yes, I started off. I did a development project where I lived in another small village in West Africa for a few years, and then I lived in Spain and France, and then when I came back, I taught children who had English as their second language. So they were recently arrived, often in Britain from another country, and I did that for quite a few years, and then eventually in 1995. I decided to take redundancy from the teaching job I was in, and it gave me sort of 6 months in which I could do something else. And I was trying to do up a very broken down house, and so I decided to go to Lewisham College to learn how to plaster, and to a women's wood workshop to learn how to do work in wood, I can, with a view to doing up my house.
Was there a conscious decision that you were done with teaching when that redundancy
There was a conscious decision that I was very tired of those demands. The last few years I'd taught at Guy's Hospital and a unit for emotionally disturbed children, and I was just tired really of. I just wanted to do something completely different and that used different skills, and that was just just more creative in a different way. I just wanted to be alone with something, so being alone with material was ideal, but I just didn't want, I wanted to kind of cut down the noise, I suppose. There'd been a lot of noise, and it was emotionally, it had been very demanding. And so, it was, so that's how it happened. It sort of, when I started the wood workshop, I immediately thought, well, this is perfect. This is just exactly, it just sort of fitted somehow. So I quickly dropped the plastering course and started on a sort of 3-year City and Guilds furniture making course. Yeah.
And so what kind of furniture were you making?
I was always making furniture nearly always. It was nearly always in hardwood. And I deliberately did an apprentices. It used to be the London College of Furniture, and then it became Guildhall University. But I didn't do the furniture design course. I did the apprentices course. I wanted to learn how to make dovetails. I wanted to learn all the old processes, and so I made furniture that was quite clean and modern, but it often had interesting joints or.
Is there something you could compare your aesthetic,
Japanese
your furniture aesthetic
joints? To? Well. I liked the work of people like Jim Partridge. I liked work that Noguchi had done in furniture. I liked Nagashima, or just fairly simple lines, but where the material spoke. You could appreciate the material. I don't know, but simple.
Was there a sense that, were you making a go of this as a business?
Yes, I worked as a furniture maker for about, I don't know, how many years? 15 years, maybe? Yeah. I started off using some other materials. I was wrapping coffee tables in zinc for a while, and, I sort of experimented with different materials, but basically it was wood that I was interested in.
Can we talk a bit before we get into what you're doing now, but what was it particularly about wood that appealed?
There was something, I immediately remembered the things that I remember the first time that I had, sawed off the corners of that table and spent hours sanding it and the smell of it and the sort of feel of it sort of, I don't know, that it was such a strong material, simple and humble, but it was kind of, I don't know, it was also fragile. There's lots of things I like about it. And the smell of it, I find the smell of it really... And also the fact that it's sort of, it feels slightly like a human material, it's sort of, it has the same human scale. It sort of lives approximately the same age as us, you know what I mean? It sort of reacts in the same way. It's a living thing. So I found all of that fascinating. When I was young, I loved eroded pieces of wood were what I collected most. I loved that feel of them in your hand, the ridges, you know what I mean, that sort of feeling of elements having worked on wood. I don't know, there was everything about it. I loved it immediately. I loved planing it. I loved the feel of, you know, the way tools worked on it. Yeah, and I find it endlessly fascinating still. I just think that, you know, a lifetime isn't sort of long enough to kind of discover all there is to know about wood, really. I mean, even within a species that I know really well, that I use all the time, every single tree is different. It's never the same because it's never had the same conditions. It's never had the same sort of life story. So therefore, it doesn't grow in the same way. And I think that's amazing for a material. It's an amazing starting point. It may be the starting point, but, you know, already there's been a whole lifetime before you start as the maker.
So you've been making furniture for 15 years.
Yeah.
And was there a moment, you can put your finger on a kind of Damascene moment where you decided furniture isn't for me, I'm going to do something else kind of entirely with this material?
Well, it wasn't a moment, but there were moments. There was the practical reasons. I was sharing a very large industrial workshop, furniture workshop, and I really, really wanted my own workshop. I wanted to be able to shut my door and not worry about whether I had left a 16-foot planks of oak down the middle of it. And then I obviously I had to go and machine that the next day. And I wanted to be in control of my own studio or workshop front door, really. So there was that. But there was also, I'd been going to... I looked at quite a lot of ceramics. My partner's father was a studio potter, and so I'd spent a lot of time going to ceramic exhibitions. And I think in 2008 at Collect, for the first time, I really started looking at Jim Partridge's vessels and Mark Rycore, Liam Flynn's vessels, and just thought I wanted to do something more creative with...
This is Collect, the Crafts
wood.
Council's
Yes.
fair.
Yes,
right.
exactly.
Yeah. Right.
Yes, which was at the V&A then. And so I had gone to look at ceramics, but I had, I came away feeling like, you know, there was a whole new arena, there was a whole new kind of adventure, really. So I went on a very short wood-turning course to learn how to make a bowl, really. But it took me until 2009 before I had a chance to build a workshop in my garden and to buy a lathe. And by that time, obviously, I'd completely forgotten what I learnt on the course in 2008. So then I just taught myself from books. So in the day, I worked as a furniture maker, and then in the evening, whenever I had a chance, I taught myself to turn.
And did you have a sense of, was there an aesthetic you were aiming for immediately, or did this sense of decay that kind of features in your work quite strongly, I think, did that grow over time? Yeah,
no, that definitely grew over time. I mean, I spent the first couple of years literally trying to be able to make the form what I felt like was the perfect form, to make a form that, to me, felt simple, elegant, but sort of compelling, you know, powerful. And so I just did it over and over again, literally. I didn't really keep anything. I just wanted to make sure I could do that. I mean, I started to, I suppose the working with unruly pieces of wood started because I didn't really have, you know, I wasn't set up with any kind of supply. I wasn't particularly looking for anything. I was just using what I had. Sometimes they were offcuts from furniture. So, I mean, that just sort of happened. That the way that I work now has definitely developed over time. It started after I had moved here to my
So how long ago did you move here?
So in 2011, there was a Worshipful Company of Turners Bursary Award here, which somebody told me about. I mean, it all happened by accident. Somebody saw my bowls in my shed because I was feeding my chickens, and they had a they had a gallery and a window on the Old Kent Road, and so my work was in the window. We put all of the forms I'd made in the window. And then somebody saw that and said, do you know there's a Worship for Company Turner Cockpit Arts bursary? So I didn't. I applied and I got it. So then I had a year's free studio space here from the end of 2011. And so that sort of gave me the chance to stop making furniture. So I stopped making furniture and I thought I'll give myself a year, see if I can make a go of it.
What kind of timbers do you use? Where do you find the wood? How do you work with it?
I mean, an important part of it is to choose a material that has the properties to kind of fulfill an idea or to bring into life an idea that you've had, I suppose. So I use two different. I use sequoia a lot. So it's Sequoia giganteum. I only use wood grown in Britain. It's important to me that I only use wood grown here. I don't have anything flown across. It feels like, environmentally.
So there is an ecological angle in other words.
Well, there's only, I think sort of feel like you have a responsibility as a human, really, to not do that. I think there's enough things you can do with wood that grows here, really. So I often use sequoia because it's one of the woods like ash or oak that grows at a different time throughout the season. So it grows very quickly in the summer, but it's very soft and it grows quite slowly, but the wood's very dense in the winter. So if you sandblast, you can blast away the softer wood, and then you can literally sort of feel in your hand the passage of time. It's like speeding up erosion, really. It's like, and so by carving and sandblasting, you can show the passage of time, I suppose, and the rhythm of growth. You can sort of see it in your. So I choose wood for that. I choose sequoia to make that kind of work because that's what I want, to give you this feeling of landscape or the rhythm of time, I suppose. And then in the other kind of work I do, I use horse chestnut burr, which is it's to do with the unnatural rhythm of growth, really. It's so it grows on the sides of, the most recognisable burrs stick out from the side of the tree and in a kind of a circular sort of form, although it doesn't always grow like that. So I use that wood because I just find it just totally magical, this natural phenomenon that grows like this. And often, I mean, in the past, it's usually sliced across the grain for walnut veneers, or it's made into veneers for the front of Jaguar cars, I just find it fascinating as a material, the way that it grows. And
I'm quite interested, you talking about finding a piece of wood to fit an idea. So does the idea come first and then you find the timber second, or vice versa?
I think it entirely depends. I mean, now, certainly at the beginning, the very first time I discovered horse chestnut burr was literally the other way around, in that I was given this piece of wood, and then having worked with it, I realised that it reminded me completely of skulls and bones and that whole wonderful feeling of decay and the beauty of softening of age and all of those things. And if I bleached it, because it was quite pale, and so I bleached it in a way that bone would be bleached by the elements. And I just, I found it, I don't know, I suppose I felt like it just completely transcended the material it was made out of, and I loved it. And so from then on, I actively look for that material. I mean, what I make out of it completely, it's a synthesis of both, of an idea and what the material will give me, because often it's not possible. I may have drawn something, or I may have an idea for something, and the wood just will not yield, and it just will not do, and so it has to be. I've now started, I draw much more in chalk, actually, on the floor, to make it much less prescriptive, or because it doesn't work like that, so when I'm turning this wood, it's a completely different process, really, turning the burr to turning the other series of work, the Time and Texture series, because with the burr, I just have to stop all the time. So it's almost like it's sort of creating it as I'm making it. It's a different thing. It has to be, I have to try and keep a fairly loose idea in my head and make sure I'm not stuck in a, even though obviously at the moment I'm making a series of work called Echoes of Amphora, which is very different from me because I've made in the past very organic pieces with that material, very sort of rounded bottomed, sit very lightly on the earth, very reminiscent of, I don't know, something that you might find in nature, I suppose. Very abstract shapes. And now I'm making quite culturally recognisable shapes, I suppose, but with this anarchic material going on in the middle. And so I can't even, even though I may start off with an idea of what I'm going to make, I can't be sure that that's what I'll finish with. I have to just work with it, and as I work, change and amend it. And
you were talking earlier about taking some inspiration from studio pottery. Do you still look at other disciplines to draw inspiration from?
Yes, completely. If I try and think of what I'm inspired by, I don't know. It's just it goes from William Garnett's photographs, which I've loved for years, that sort of going up in a Cessna plane in the 1950s and taking pictures of the landscape, and looking at that as some kind of abstract art, or Bill Brandt, so lots of photographers or Maplethorpe, but then I like. There's lots of ceramicists whose work I've really loved for years, like Ken Eastman or Madeline Nadundo, and then lots of sculptors whose work I think has been important to me, from David Nash to Ursula von Riddingsvart or Beverly Pepper or Louise Nevelson. I mean, lots of people. Some working in wood and some not. And I don't know how things work in terms of how influence or how inspiration works. I think it's quite fascinating, but I just think it's a whole lifetime of experience, isn't it, really? I mean, if I think about wood carving, somebody once came and saw my work and said, "Oh, why does it all look African?" And I said, "Well, I have no, I don't, that isn't something that had struck me at all." But then I think about experiences I had when I was living there, and to do with the way things sat on the earth. If you live in a culture where lots of activity takes place outside, there's lots of round-bottomed vessels. Or if you think about, I visited somewhere called Oshogbo, which is the most amazing carving in all sorts of materials of kind of both religious and artifacts, I suppose. I mean, years, and this was in 1983, I think, just a long time ago. And I don't know. There's lots of things that come back to you that you think were probably have somehow percolated through your life and your experience and come out in your work. But I've no idea how you quantify that at all. Well, I don't know. For me, that's the way it is. I mean, I didn't have a formal education in what I do, so apart from training to be a furniture maker. So everything I do, I suppose, I've read about, I've read a lot of things about art history or ceramics, or, I don't know, I'm just interested, or sculpture.
And can we talk about colour, Eleanor? Because obviously you mentioned the bleached wood, but there's also, you do a lot of the kind of, which I'm presuming, the black, which I'm presuming is burned.
Some of it is, and some of it isn't. So some of it, again, it's to do with knowing the properties of material, I suppose. And I suppose the fact that I worked in wood as a furniture maker for 15 years kind of gave me a head start in that I knew quite a lot about wood and how it reacted and what it could do. And so I try and use what is inherent in the wood. So a lot of the black pieces are sequoia, which is full of tannin. And so if you make an iron solution by boiling steel wool in vinegar, then it reacts with the tannin and turns that into dark grey or black, depending on the... And then you can just do, I don't know, you just play around with those ideas, like leaving it very wet, and then those iron particles start to rust, so you get all sorts of... in some pieces I do called Ferrous Shift, the piece that was at Homo Faber, that's all to do with playing around with those whole the rusting of iron. So I do sometimes scorch, but I mean, it's a fairly limited palette, I think, to kind of either earth colours or elemental colours, I suppose.
Elemental, I like
yes,
that. I like
yes.
that. Can we talk briefly, because we're coming to an end of our time, really, but...
Oh, sorry, that's the compressor. Shall I try and turn that off?
Okay, so coming to the end of our time, but I'm intrigued. You've been doing this for 10 years now. 2008, you saw it collect. And I'm just wondering, how do you feel the market for the kind of work that you do has changed in that time?
Well, I suppose at the very beginning, I was making very different things. So when I started here in 2011, I was making quite domestic, functional work. So I'm not even sure I was very aware of the market in terms of sculptural forms or vessels in wood. I certainly didn't know it, intimately. That I definitely feel that there's a movement to accept wood more as a sort of a contemporary sculptural material, I suppose. And I think it has been, certainly, in terms of furniture, but in terms of vessels or sculptural forms, I'm not sure that it doesn't have the history, I suppose, that ceramic and glass have in that area.
Do you see yourself as a sculptor?
I don't. I really struggle calling myself anything. I almost feel like that's for... I just make work in wood, and it feels like a label that sort of hems you in slightly. So I try not to. I think a lot of interesting work happens on those boundaries between all of those things, and it almost feels like it's a sort of political statement, labelling yourself in some way, and that I wish it wasn't so. I suppose it's because of which label has more power, which market is more lucrative, or which, and I just, there's something about it that I obviously I accept it exists. I just wish it didn't. I make work and it's sold, and I just want to keep making the work. But so I'm not even quite sure. I sculpt wood, it's true, but does that make me a sculptor? I don't know. I've just been in America, where I'm definitely called an artist in wood, or I've been in France, where they call me a sculptor, and I'm here, I call myself a maker. I don't know what I'm different things according to where my work is, I suppose. And I just hold on to, I just want to make things that are in one way made out of a humble material, in some ways very ordinary, but also magical, or, are more than the material they're made out of.
Eleanor Lakelin, that seems like a perfect place to finish. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.